Per, it is hard to believe that more than 20 years ago, you and I worked together at a small tech company, an asset management company here in Pittsburgh called MediaSite. Amazing.
Yeah, it's been a long time, and I'm very pleased to be on the show, and very pleased to meet you again.
Yeah, and thanks for reaching out. That's what I love about LinkedIn and social media. You reached out and said we should reconnect. I think I can add a lot of value for your guests on your show for your audience. And I completely agree. You have amazing experience, a global resume as a CEO, a business development leader, and someone who has probably seen it all when it comes to sales forces and what makes teams tick. The focus of today's conversation is about pricing. You call yourself the price whisperer. Why is that?
Well, it's a moniker that I didn't invent, actually. What happened was that people started to call me the price whisperer. And when I had heard that 50 or 100 times or something like that, I said, well, maybe I should just adopt it, and I did, and if nothing else, because I got such a wacky name, being natively Swedish, at least people can find me through just by Googling the price whisper, So it's something that makes more sense for an American audience, and even though we work globally, most of our clients are here in the States, so.
You're the third whisperer I know of. There's the horse whisperer, yep. There's the baby whisperer, and you're the price whisperer. So that means you're helping people, you're helping teams be more effective with their strategies. As a quick research, I went into Google just for fun, and I put in the following queries. Why is B2B pricing difficult? That's what I typed in. Any guesses as to how many Google search results came back?
Oh, no, I have actually no idea, but
it is 29.7 million search results. Wow. And then I typed in, why is B2C pricing difficult? And I got 4.4. So I don't know if that's scientific or not, but it seems like in that math, B2B pricing is nearly 7 times more difficult than B2C. Now, I assume, given your experience, you spend a lot of time with B2B companies talking about pricing, but you probably also work with B2C also, correct?
Yeah, I do, but it's about half and half, to be honest. And I think I know the answer to why people say that B2B pricing is so much more difficult. And one of the most common mistakes people do in business is to set prices on a competitor. So they look up the price of a competitor, and then they say, we're a little bit better, so let me guess that we could take another 10% higher price. Or our competitor is a little better than me, or better than us, I should say. And by the way, we're new in the market, so let us price 10% lower. And that fluff factor of 10% is purely gut feel. Now, in B2B, this is relatively easy to do in B2C, because if nothing else, you can look it up on the web, or you can go to the store, if nothing else, and see, what your competitor are charging for their butter fluffer when you comes out with a new butter fluffer. In B2B, that's a lot harder. And really, what I'll tell you the story why I really got into this. And I was involved with a data storage company, and we made these massively scalable data storage systems. I was the CMO, and the pricing was not on my table. It was the strategy officer and CEO who did that. And what they tried to do was to obtain the price list of a competitor. And the best you can always get was, maybe there was a friendly customer who gave you the sort of last year's price list, or I know at one point we got an international price list, or the GSA schedule. And then these two guys said, okay, we're a little bit better. So you start with, information that is completely irrelevant because it's old and it's incomplete, and it doesn't include what discounts competitor are making, what deals they're making, what bundles they're making, and so forth. So it's just a number that is irrelevant. And then on top of that, data platform that was completely useless, they added the fluff factor, and they said, we're a little bit better. We have a little higher data, transfer capacity. So because of that, we're going to be a little bit higher, And then, of course, they sent out the salespeople and said, take any deal at any price. And the company eventually, and I said, this is so sick that there must be a better way, And long story short, there was 62 million of investor capital in the company, and investors got 9 million back when they sold the asset in bankruptcy.
Wow.
Yep. So
that's a heck of a story, and it really does demonstrate how competitive-based pricing does not always work. It didn't really reflect the value that your company was providing.
No,
is that what motivated you to take a different approach?
Well, I ran 2 companies in Europe, and when I moved here to the States in the early 1990s, actually mid 1990s, 94, I joined a company, a fairly large public company, established a new division for the company and grew that. And then after that event, I ran another 4 companies here, and had some other stints, like when we met, where I think I was VP of Biz Dev, but in all these companies I ran, we did experiments with pricing, and some of those experiments were very successful. Type next quarter revenues are up 25%. Others were complete disasters, and many of them were just inconclusive. And what I learned about pricing in business school was so academic and so theoretical that it was completely useless. It didn't help us at all to understand why some of those experiments worked. So after that story or instance, maybe with the storage company, I decided at that point I was too old and too opinionated to be a hired gun anymore. So I started my own thing and developed a process that really makes every pricing experiment a success. And you said value-based pricing, and yes, but it needs to be value-based pricing where you actually know what your customers are willing to pay for the value you deliver.
And how do you go about that? This is not an easy thing, because especially in an environment where testing is tricky, if you have long-standing relationships, it depends on the nature of the business, I would think. How do you set up tests, and how do you understand the dynamics of how to go about a value-based pricing experiment?
Well, testing is something that you should avoid too, and that is because, especially in B2B, you want to have recurring customers, eh? And if they see prices that are changing every time they go and buy something, you just create confusion. And the one thing that a confused customer is not going to do, and that is to buy from you, and so testing is not the way. And the process that I developed is and that we use in my company is all about using a very different kind of online market research from which we can accurately measure the specific value that a marketplace will seize with a product or a service. And
can you share an example?
Oh, we're talking about B2B, eh? One example is a customer here in the Los Angeles area where I am, that we discovered that they were so underpriced. They have a business phone system in the cloud, and we discovered they were so underpriced that they could they could quadruple their prices. And two things happened as a result of quadrupling. Well, first of all, it took them about 9 months, so they didn't do it overnight. But two things happened after they quadrupled their prices. First of all, their sales volume went up with 25%, and then using the term that the CEO, the very technical term the CEO mentioned, he said, and we got rid of the bottom feeders. So now we have a more professional level of customers, and our customer support costs have gone down with 80%, right?
What were some of the main justifications to move the price up 4 times?
Well, it has to do with that pricing itself is the strongest marketing message of benefit and value. And if you're underpriced yourself, it sends a message of inferior quality, inferior benefit. And, you know, we've all been there. We hold something in our hand and we say, oh, I kind of want this, but this is so cheap that it can't be any good. And then we don't buy it. So that's what happened with this particular company. But the other lesson to learn here is that pricing also selects the customer. And if you're very low priced, you are only getting customers that are price sensitive. And price sensitive customers care only about one thing, and that's your low price. They don't care much about the product or the service that you're selling. And because of that, they don't really bother to learn it properly, which is what this company experienced. And that's why as soon as there was a question, they just called their customer support and got help from customer support, as opposed to really understand how to use this particular product. So then of course we all want returning customers, but as a price sensitive customer, as soon as there is an alternative that's a little bit cheaper, they're gone, you know. So they're never loyal to you, and because of that, if you really look at it, in almost every market, the market leader is the high priced, high value choice, not the low price alternatives, you know.
So there's really a psychology to this. You know, if I go back to my psychology 101 class and different experiments with people's motivations and how they think.
Yep.
As an entrepreneur, we might think about pricing differently. It's probably, like you said earlier, about the competitive pricing. Perhaps that's the most common. And it feels a little bit scary to move. We all want to be in that top right box. We all want to be in that upper right quadrant, high value, high price. Well, what would have happened to that data storage business, though, if they increased their price and their volume went down? Were they prepared for that alternative scenario? And obviously it didn't happen, but what were the contingency plans?
No, this was most companies only look at sales volume. And in fact, we did if you look at it from any company's point of view, profitability comes from only 3 variables. It's the total cost of what you sell and the operation. It is the sales volume of whatever you sell, and it is the price of whatever you sell. And if you look at all of these 3, and you can do a simple thought experiment. If you change one of these 3 1%, how does that impact profitability of a company? Well, if you can increase your sales volume with 1%, for the average company, your profitability goes up with 3.5%. If you can reduce your cost with 1%, for the average company, profitability goes up with 5.5%. But if you can increase your price with 1% or decrease your discounting with 1%, profitability goes up with 11.3% for the average company. Now, I have something that I talk about in my presentations and so forth that I call the 1% challenge. And the challenge is very simple. It is, have you ever failed to change something 1%? Ever? You know? Have you ever told your salespeople, nope, you cannot discount this much. You have to discount 5% less, right? And suddenly, for the average company, you have increased your profit with 50%, right? Think about that. I mean, this is leverage, you know. And but also talked about psychology, and there is actually an academic field that talk about the psychology behind our purchase behavior, and it's called behavioral economics. And the interesting thing, though, is that I set up this process that we had that we still follows and so forth. And only about 5 years ago, I got wind of this behavioral economics. So I was doing the practical implementation of behavioral economics for 10 years before I even knew it existed, you know, which is kind of funny, you know.
It is. Well, and the academic side of it, as you said earlier, is just like that, right? It doesn't feel practical. It's, sometimes feels convoluted and complicated. And a lot of business owners, they've learned on the job. Maybe they've built their business. Maybe they're an HVAC company and they have business B2B side to what they do. Plus they have residential. Yeah. Does your process work for those types of companies? Call it more service businesses, or is it more perfected for products?
It doesn't matter. It works. It's all about buying behavior. And whether you buy a service or whether you buy a product, whether you buy it for your company or whether you buy it for yourself, purchase behavior is the same. And it all starts with emotions. All purchases are made emotionally. And then once we made our emotion decision, we put rationale around it for ourselves and for others, because we believe that we're going to be rational animals, and we're not, and and a lot of what this behavioral economics is talking about is how that lack of rationale actually happened, and in fact, behavioral economics, the first theories that really was developed by a guy called Singer, and he got the Nobel Prize, I think it was 78 or something like that. But the first thing, I mean, it was in B2B, and specifically how the price is a message of value, and later on there's been oodles of experiments in this. When, for example, they found that a 5-cent aspirin is not particularly effective in curing your headache, whereas a 50% aspirin is, So that perception of value, perception of benefit is closely related to the price.
Yeah, I want to just bring this back to why I thought it was important to have you on the show. A lot of times in the discourse and discussions in these episodes is about how can owners create a more sellable, transferable business? How do they create value? Mm-hmm. And pricing, as you just mentioned earlier with the numbers you shared, is probably the number one lever. And if we can create a competitive differentiation, if we own our niche, whatever makes our company special and different, ultimately we should be able to charge a premium price.
Yes.
If a company is listening, an owner is listening, and they're thinking about this for their products or services and are interested in learning more, it feels like a little bit like a black box right now, because I know you have an artificial intelligence platform, you're doing predictive analytics. That inherently sounds complicated. How do we unpack it a little bit to help people understand what is the process? What does it look like if you're working in either consulting or with your software and solutions to help them determine a pricing strategy?
Well, first off, let's talk about value and valuation, and typical results when you start doing value pricing the right way is a doubling of sales growth, 25 to 40% higher margins. And because this happened in a hockey stick kind of way, you will enjoy roughly 3 to 5 times higher valuation. which of course makes a huge difference for any company, and especially when you look at company ownership, because most owners eventually want to exit and in some way, either by an IPO or selling the company, so that by itself make a very makes a huge difference. Now, when it comes to the actual process, it's really very simple, because everything that we do happens in the background, and what we do with our clients is that we and I said that our process is it's online market research, but it's market research incredibly different and not to be compared to what you get from a market research company, because they don't do what we do. A market research company may tell you what people want. We tell our clients what people want to pay for, what they want to buy, which is very different than what you want. Yeah, I want the Ferrari. I'm not going to buy a Ferrari. So it's what you want to pay for that is the important thing. And so we create a research design. We do our research in the marketplace. We feed that data into our AI platform that we developed, and outspits lots of charts, really, demand curves that are, again, very different than what you would see in business school. But then I have experienced business people that look at these theoretical curves and make total business sense. So we end up telling our customers, this is the customer profile that you should focus on, because it will lead to the highest sales volume and revenue. These are the features and functions and benefit you should focus on, because it leads to the highest sales and revenue. These are the marketing channels and marketing messages you should use, because it leads to the highest sales and revenue. Then these are the sales channels and methodologies you should use. And of course, these is the pricing strategy that will lead to the minimum of sales friction and maximum sales and revenue. So it's really a complete go-to-market strategy for any company who wants to elevate itself to the next level.
So in the spirit of the saying, eating your own dog food, did your company use this process in your own pricing strategy?
Yep.
That's great. That's great. And this is a long time coming. This is from years and years of your experience. And then it sounds like you have some talented folks on your team, a combination of probably psychology, behavioral economics and marketing. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting mix.
Yeah. And most importantly, business experience, I own, what I've done is I reconstituted, if you like, a couple of very, very, very successful prior business executives. I've taken them out of retirement, and so they do a little bit more interesting things than playing golf, One of them was Steve Jobs' mentor, another one was an innovator and in whatchamacallit, like a large Canadian tech company had more than 1,000 people reporting to him and stuff like that. So.
That's great. Who do you work with most commonly? When you and I talked offline, you mentioned private equity groups are coming to you.
Yeah, private equity, I get a lot of business. It's sort of funny. I get these emails out of the blue every so often from a CEO of a typically mid-market company, and where he or she writes to me and said, I have been told by our board we should talk.
That's an interesting way to say it.
Yeah, and I mean, from a private equity point of view, they invest in a company. They typically have a horizon of 3 to 5 years before they want to sell it, and with our services, we'll cut that down to a year.
Amazing.
So, it makes a huge difference, and we have we have oodles of, I mean, we're working with currently two companies, both private equity groups, and one we've seen they can double their prices and actually see an increase in sales. The other one can increase prices with about 40% without any damage on sales volume. So and this is going to make a huge difference for each of these companies, and both of them have billion-dollar $600 billion opportunity.
That's huge. What about the smaller companies? Is this good for companies in the lower middle market?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I mentioned this phone company. I think they were around about $1 million, maybe even a little less than $1 million when we did the first work for them, and obviously now they're 10 times as big, So
that's great. That's great. I think in terms of what we learn in school about marketing, the 5 Ps, sometimes people talk about the 4, which means one's missing. Yeah. Is it pricing? Is pricing the forgotten P, and we're bringing it back and putting it in the forefront?
Well, pricing is so here is what the problem with business school teaching is, and that is that it doesn't talk about how all I'm talking about the 4 Ps. I forget people many times, but it doesn't say that each of the 4 Ps or 5 Ps, if you want to call them that, interact, right? And they look at each of them in like they would be in a vacuum, but they're not, meaning that let's say place is who you sell to and so forth, and many times we can see that if you sell to a different category of people, you can substantially increase your prices. And let me give you an example of this. A couple of years ago, we did a project for a company who sold a particular kind of employee training, and they sold this training to the HR departments, and HR departments they don't have a lot of budgets for anything, and so the company was struggling, and they wanted to sell high. They wanted to sell to the C-suite instead, and which makes all the sense. But what was discovered was that the C-suite wanted to buy this particular training, but they wanted to buy it for completely different reasons. So once the company had, and they were not successful with the messages and the marketing messages and sales methodology in the C-suite that kind of worked in the HR department, but by completely changing how they market and how their messages work, they could approach the C-suite with much higher prices and be very successful because they had completely different reasons for buying.
Interesting. And that's a good example too, because it's the buying group who, the economic buyer, the HR department, the one with the budget, couldn't make a yes decision. But if the C-suite agreed to it for other reasons and saw a different ROI on it, then that unlocked that potential. That's great.
I mean, it was like, I remember one of the key drivers here was for the HR department was sort of reduce mistakes and similar things, Whereas for the C-suite, it was one of the key drivers was reduce turnover, right?
Yeah, and there's real hard dollars on that.
HR department don't care about turnover because that's their livelihood,
Yeah, to go hire new people. That's right. That's right. But there's a good way to quantify that. That's great. Thanks for sharing all of this. I know as we wrap up our time together today, I'd love to ask everyone when they come on, if they have a favorite quote to share. And I've given you a little bit of time to think about it. Did you have one in mind?
let me paraphrase Warren Buffett, right, with a quote. And he said this. He said that the most important criterion for making an investment in a company is whether the company has pricing power or not. And then he continued saying that, and pricing power is the ability to increase prices without losing sales volume, right? And that's where we are all about.
Love it. I love it. If people want to get in touch with you, Per, to learn more, what's a good way to find you?
Well, my company is called Sjöfors and Partners, and our website is sjöfors.com. I can be reached at per@sjöfors.com. It's a difficult name, spelled oddly, and makes perfect sense again in my native Sweden, but not here. So you can always just Google the Price Whisperer, and you can find me that way. So that's one way, and obviously I want to thank you for this time, Laura, and hope this was interesting for your audience.
Thank you so much, Per, and we'll be sure to put the links in the show notes so people can find you. And I probably mentioned your name pronunciation has never escaped me because my husband is Swedish. So yeah. I've very comfortable with that. And hearing your accent makes me feel comfortable, like I'm back with his family. So thanks so much for reconnecting. Thanks for coming on the show and sharing all your wisdom about pricing and how we can be more profitable.
Thank you so much, Laurie. And thanks again to the audience.